Three, two, one, zero.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Ground Control, where we talk about all things in outer space. This is going to be a fun episode. We're talking a little bit entertainment in outer space, what things Hollywood gets right and wrong when it comes to movies and TV shows. First, going to introduce my wonderful co-host and co-worker. I'm meteorologist Andrew Brightman. I've got Matt Campbell here, one of our producer extraordinaires, also someone who loves space just like me. How are you doing today, Matt?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing absolutely lovely on this day. And one of the reasons I'm doing very lovely is we've got a very special guest with us, courtesy of your wonderful contacts, Matt. We have Dr. Joshua Caldwell here. We've got the interim dean of the College of Sciences at the University of Central Florida. You got bachelor's degree in physics, minor in mathematics, PhD in astrophysical, planetary, and atmospheric sciences. Atmospheric sciences, love that, Dr. Josh, from the University of Colorado at Boulder. But one of the reasons you've got a little bit of a movie credit, and also you were the science coordinator for one of my favorite movies in outer space, the movie Deep Impact. How are you doing today, Dr. Josh?
I'm doing great, and obviously have great taste in cinema.
Yeah, fabulous.
That's what that's saying. Thank you.
Yeah.
But thank you for saying.
Yeah, I do. I love that movie. And, Dr. Josh, jumping into it here, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you here is first getting it started. How did you come across the opportunity to become sort of the science coordinator and advisor for the movie Deep Impact here? You're a university professor. You know a lot of things about outer space, but how do you kind of get connected with Hollywood?
I had a great connection through my brother, who is an assistant director and director, and he was the first AD on Deep Impact. And months and months and months before they started filming, he was calling me up and he's telling me he's working on this new movie about a comet that's going to hit the Earth. And they're trying to work out the timeline for the sequence of events, when they discover it, how long it takes to get there, how long before the comet hits, what happens when it does hit in the ocean, and all of that. And that actually happened to align with my area of research at the time. I was studying impacts in the solar system, comets and asteroids hitting planetary objects. So I would answer him. He would take it back to the production meetings, pre-production. And after 3 or 4 of these meetings where he's saying, well, my brother, the astrophysicist, says, they decided to hire me as a science advisor. And then I just have to take personal credit for my own charming good nature. At the science advising meeting, they decided to let me appear in the movie, and I ended up with a small speaking part in the movie. So that was a great opportunity and a lot of fun.
You had an action role.
Running down the hall into mission control, yes, it was a great experience. A couple days as an actor on the movie, and then reviewing the script. I lived in Colorado at the time. They would FedEx the scripts to me. I would mark them up, FedEx them back, and they really did, to their credit, the producers and the director of the movie, take the impact from me and other advisors on the movie very seriously, and made real significant changes to the movie that I think made it more realistic, but also it helped with some dramatic storytelling as well.
So kind of jumping into that, Josh, what were some of the biggest changes that your kind of science expertise that you had to kind of explain or recommend that they potentially change to the script? Because obviously this big Hollywood movie cost tens of millions of dollars to make, and, you're telling them you got to, if you want to make it as realistic and scientifically accurate as possible, these are some of the adjustments you need to do. What were kind of some of the big points that you're trying to get across to the producer and director?
Well, the first major change was getting them to understand what the strength of gravity is on a small comet. And it's so close to zero that it might as well be zero. If you're standing on a comet the size of the one in Deep Impact, or many of the small objects that we're sending spacecraft to these days, and you drop something, it'd take it minutes to fall to the surface. So the gravity is super weak. So that meant suspending your actors in their spacesuits from wires in the soundstage and having them essentially sort of fly over the surface. It also gave them an opportunity to utilize the activity of the comet as a threat to blast an astronaut off the surface and lose them. And then the second one was that comets are active on the day side and they're quiet on the night side. So if you're going to be doing some activity on a comet, you want to do it on the night side of the comet. And that then gave them another dramatic opportunity, which was the day, the sunrise timer. Basically, you land on the night side, and you've got a certain number of hours before sunrise hits. And when sunrise hits, things get kind of ugly kind of quickly on the surface of the comet there. So those were two of the biggies.
I mean, that's fascinating because that's a major aspect of the movie. I mean, for anyone that hasn't seen it, R.I.P. Jon Favreau here, as you were talking about one of the aspects of it.
Just in the movie.
Just in the movie.
Yeah,
great. Obviously great director and actor in his own right. But so that was a big part. That's really one of the central aspects here of when it came to trying to blow up the comet. As we kind of, as Biederman was making its way towards Earth. How much of, in terms of your input, in terms of the size of the wave, all of those aspects were your sort of thoughts and scientific expertise incorporated into the movie?
Quite a bit. The portrayal of the small leftover fragment of the comet, spoiler alert, hits in the ocean and launches essentially a wave that's traveling at supersonic velocities until it reaches the coast, and the amplitude builds up and it causes all sorts of devastation. And they scaled the wave height down to an appropriate height from what they had originally had in the script, and emphasized the speed of it racing across the deep ocean. And Morgan Freeman's as the president in the movie addresses the nation and warns of what's going to happen when this wave hits. And that stuff was almost verbatim from some of the notes that I gave them on what would happen when the wave approaches the shore. So they really took our input quite seriously, and they made a very realistic portrayal in the end.
And I'm sure it's really cool to have Morgan Freeman reading what you've written in a way,
Yeah, it was very cool. The whole experience was great.
So kind of following up on one of the things you were pointing out, how big did they originally want to make the wave? Because the wave was still, when it reached New York City, was still over 1,000 feet high. How big are we talking here?
I think originally it was 5 times taller. It was a mile high in the original script. And, it's still pretty exciting the way it was. And in fact, that was at that time, the Twin Towers were still standing. Yep. And in the movie, you can see that wave is sort of just at the roof of the Twin Towers, and you see people up on the roof seeking refuge. So it's another sort of dramatic moment made possible by having those scales.
And that's fascinating. And one last question here before we go to break. What was more exciting for you? Getting to put in all the scientific input into a big action movie, and really, as you're telling me, almost taking exactly what you were saying here, really great impact, trying to make it as scientifically accurate as possible, or you actually got a movie CV, a movie credit. You're an IMDb. You're an actor.
That's right. Yeah. Well, the pay was better for acting, I'll have to say.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think that my performance as a scientist was maybe better than my performance as an actor. There's a reason why I'm still acting. I'm still doing better.
I love it.
Teaching doesn't really pay residuals.
No, it doesn't. But I do try to, when I'm in front of the classroom, got to flex those acting chops a little bit.
There you go.
I love it. So we've gotten all of your kind of looking back at your feedback and input on the movie Deep Impact, but coming up here after the break, we're going to be taking a few minutes here and talking about several of our favorite shows and movies. I've got a couple of shows and movies. Matt has got a couple of shows and movies. What does Hollywood really get right? What was accurate? What is sort of kind of true science fiction here? Mm-hmm. We are going to be talking to a true expert in Dr. Josh Caldwell after getting his feedback, the great feedback he had for Deep Impact. We're going to be talking about some of those, our favorite shows and movies here coming up right after the break. You are watching Ground Control on Queen C News Plus. Be right back after this. Welcome back, everyone, to Ground Control on Queen C News Plus. I'm meteorologist Andrew Brightman. I've got my co-host with me, Matt Campbell, and our wonderful guest here, Dr. Josh Cowell, the interim dean of the College of Sciences at the University of Central Florida, the science advisor for the movie Deep Impact. And now we're going to start talking about movies he wasn't the science advisor for and kind of getting his hot takes about what they get right and what they get wrong. I'm going to get the festivities started off with another movie that came out about a global killer asteroid in the late 90s. And of course, I know you know this, Dr. Josh, the movie Armageddon. Famously, both came out the same year. Hollywood gets, sometimes they get the same ideas at the same time here. And let's talk about what Armageddon got right and probably a lot more of really what it got wrong. Josh.
Yeah, Armageddon, boy, let me count the ways. That movie was frustrating for a number of ways and a number of reasons. And we can start off with the discovery of the threatening asteroid in the movie is the size of Texas, and it's 2 weeks away or something like that from hitting the Earth. So that's just impossible. We've seen everything that size out to a very, very great distance from the Earth. Nothing that size is going to be coming in to hit us without years and years of warning. The idea then that you can train a bunch of oil drillers to be astronauts faster than you can train astronauts to drop a bomb. And that for something the size of Texas, whether the bomb is a few hundred feet beneath the surface or not, is going to make a difference blowing it up, is also ridiculous. And I mentioned that with Deep Impact, the gravity of the asteroid or the comet was handled very accurately. Something this size would have a non-trivial gravity, but still very weak. But they really didn't want things moving slowly in that movie. They wanted, people running around like in a terrestrial Earth-based action scene. So they concocted this ridiculous idea that the astronauts' spacesuits would have little retro rockets mounted on the shoulders, blasting up at all time, which of course you never see in the movie. It's a throwaway line as an act of desperation, I think, to try to justify how everybody's sort of walking around normally. And the idea that you would do all of that to make you heavier, it's actually great to be light.
Yeah.
I've done the Vomit Comet zero-G stuff. That's a much, much easier way to move around and work so that you would let's put some rockets on our astronauts shooting up to force them into the ground. Yes, I could go on, as I said.
Yeah, you absolutely could. Just a quick follow-up. I mean, the biggest thing for me when I saw this movie, I was 9 years old. I'm like, how do they not see an asteroid twice the size of Texas? So we're talking an asteroid actually bigger potentially than the largest asteroid in the solar system series. Like an asteroid almost the size of Mars coming towards Earth, and they don't see it until it's 30 days away. It's a little ludicrous here, Josh.
It is. Yes. Yeah.
And
And the thing about that and so many other things in that movie is unnecessarily so.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be that big to destroy the planet. The asteroid that wiped out most of the life on Earth and famously led to the extinction of the dinosaurs was only 5-10 miles across.
something, a little bit more manageable. Let's talk about another project that may not be accurate when it comes, and it's more recent. For All Mankind, that's the Apple TV Plus series that depicts what would have happened if the space race had actually continued, if the Russians had beaten the U.S. to Earth. What are they getting right, and where are they fudging a little?
Well, they're getting a lot right. It's been 50 years plus since we last had humans on the moon. And if we let our imaginations run wild, as they have on this show, it's like, what would things be like, or what could they be like with Earth, with exploration of the moon and going on to Mars if we had just continued at that pace? So that's a show that I think is grounded in realism. There are liberties taken, but you're generally presenting technology scenario, the hazards, And the challenge is realistically, you've got to deal with a very life-threatening environment with the vacuum of space. You've got to deal with life support systems and long transportation times, and all of these sorts of things are recognized and appropriately addressed in that show. It reminds me a little bit in that sense of another show called The Expanse, about sort of a future economy with exploration of the asteroid belt that also sort of is grounded in the real solar system.
Now, we're looking at a kind of a scene there where the astronauts are on the moon, and there is the season premiere of season 2, where there's a solar storm, a big solar flare, and they have to have all the astronauts find shelter as quickly as possible. How real is that?
It's frighteningly real, actually. One of the things that I think we don't really appreciate, that's easy to take for granted here on the surface of the Earth, is the protection that we get from the sun, from our atmosphere, which is quite thin, and from the Earth's magnetic field, which deflects charged particles that are constantly streaming out from the sun from reaching the surface of the Earth. Instead, the magnetic field deflects those and concentrates them into the polar regions, and those charged particles light up the upper atmosphere with the famous northern lights or southern lights if you're in the southern hemisphere. Without that magnetic field and without an atmosphere, which is the case on the moon, those particles just hit, and they're quite hazardous. And this is a very serious threat that NASA and other agencies that are sending people and thinking about sending people on deep space missions have to take, which is, how do we protect the astronauts in the event of a big solar flare where the number of charged particles and the flux of those charged particles is much higher, and it's quite hazardous to human health.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. I love that show because, again, it's trying to be as scientifically realistic as possible. And we're going to be talking more about some of our favorite shows and movies based in outer space here coming up in the final block here of this episode of Ground Control. I'm meteorologist Andrew Brightman, Matt Campbell, and Dr. Joshua Call will be right back after the break. Welcome back to Ground Control on Queen City News Plus. I'm meteorologist Andrew Brightman. I've got my amazing co-hosts here with me, and Matt Campbell, along with Dr. Joshua Caldwell, the Interim Dean of Sciences at the University of Central Florida. We are talking more here about our favorite shows in outer space. You just saw that clip here on the side. Matt, you want to kick it off with one of your favorite shows?
There's one show that has been inspirational and aspirational for a lot of people, Star Trek. It's been around for 60 years now. And I know that some of the things are not exactly real or could be real. Some could. But how is the science on Star Trek?
I mean, you mentioned it being inspirational. It certainly was to me. And the character Spock in particular, as a scientist, space explorer, is something that resonated with me from a very, very young age. I love Star Trek, and they had some amazing foresight with predicting things like our cell phones, essentially. The communicators, that sort of seamless communication, we take it for granted when we watch that now, but that was crazy science fiction in the 60s. Now we're all walking around with communicators. We can pull out our little handheld device and get in touch with anybody on the planet just like that, even by speaking into it. And portable computers, artificial intelligence, all of that was foreseen in Star Trek. Then there are things where they're basically saying, let's just set the laws of physics aside because we want to tell a story. We want to get our characters down to the surface and back up without having to do a whole bunch of shooting a spaceship, going down and landing and taking off. So let's just make a transporter that's essentially magic. And let's have our ships be able to travel around the galaxy and not take years and years and have to worry about relativistic time dilation and things like that. So let's invent warp drive. I'm totally fine with that. Tells the story. They create a world. They're self-consistent within that world, and it lets them tell great stories.
Mm-hmm.
No, love that. Love that show. One of the more contemporary sort of science fiction into the future shows here that I really enjoy is a show that came out a few years ago. I was on the Sci-Fi. It was the show called The Expanse. Takes also place of hundreds of years into the future. And for me personally, I always really liked it because it felt really grounded in scientific realism because it didn't talk about trying to do hypothetical faster than light travel, but was really grounded in the limits of what humans can do in terms of fusion power and being able to get around the solar system and the limits of what we know of how physics work. And it was really pushing up against it. I think it took place in the mid 2300s. So obviously this isn't happening tomorrow. But I just want to ask you your opinion. What were kind of some of the feedbacks that you've had on the show, The Expanse, which many people have said has been, for the most part, grounded in scientific realism. But I wanted to kind of get it from the source here, Dr. Josh.
Absolutely. Very, very well done show. Very much grounded in. So I don't really want to use that metaphor talking about a show that's taking place out in space, but very much grounded in physics. And they kind of, one of the things I like about that show is they get some things realistically right that you wouldn't even notice if they weren't there, like pouring a liquid in low gravity on a spinning object, and the path of the stream sort of deviates due to the Coriolis force because the difference between the strength of gravity and the rotational effects are so different than they are in our terrestrial setting. If you didn't see that, nobody would be complaining, oh, they didn't get that, glass of water getting poured correctly or anything like that. So I love that sort of extra attention to detail and realism within The Expanse. And of course, it's very much human storytelling and human politics and factions and fighting and things like that. So realistic in that regard as well.
Yeah, and I wonder just a quick last question before we start to wrap it up here. How long do you think before humans could try to just achieve, because the big thing if we're really going to go faster in the solar system is trying to get towards fusion space power, like what sort of time frame would you be thinking here potentially, Josh?
Fusion power is a challenge. It really is. We're just now there's a joke in the physics world that we're always 2 decades away from fusion power, and that's been the case for my whole lifetime, which is a little bit more than 2 decades. So it's physically possible. It's technologically possible. If we really, really committed ourselves to it, we're probably talking about less than 100 years, more than 20, before you would have something where you could actually use that as a practical power source.
Yeah. So
have to put the investment in.
Yeah, I got to put the investment.
Have to make a commitment. Yep. Financial and a long-term willingness to say, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah. Dr. Joshua Kahl, I really appreciate your time talking to us, given your, telling us about your experience being the science advisor for Deep Impact, and then also setting us straight here about our favorite shows and movies and about what they get right and what they get wrong. But you were talking about commitment. Now I'm going to get over to a commitment that we're going to be doing here at Ground Control with my co-host, Matt Campbell. We've got a new segment. It's called Matt's Fact, where he gives us an interesting little factoid here at the end of every show. Matt, take it away. What is your fact here?
All right, my fact today is actually a movie that stars Dr. Colwell's co-star, Robert Duvall, but it was directed by Robert Altman. It starred James Caan, and it was about a mission that NASA was going to send a human to the moon by himself. The movie is Countdown. It came out in 1967. It had a lot of involvement with NASA, and they got to shoot at many NASA facilities and use NASA equipment. It was a really interesting film, and like I said, it was directed by Robert Altman, and he got fired from that film because he used dialogue, people talking over each other. And the head of the studio said, "That I can't understand it. Everybody's talking. Get that out of there." So they fired him.
Oh, wow. Fascinating. Matt, love that. this weekly Matt's Fact. Really appreciate it. Again, just wrapping it up here. Dr. Joshua Caldwell, really appreciate your time. Always love talking to you about science and space. Matt, always a pleasure as well having you as my co-host.
Thank you.
Really, really fun. That's going to do it for this episode of Ground Control on Queen City News Plus for my co-host Matt Campbell and, of course, our lovely guest, Josh Caldwell. I'm meteorologist Andrew Brightman. We'll see you on the next episode. Take care.
Queen City News Plus. Just search Queen City News on your smart TV's app store.